This Sunday on Capital Connection, House Speaker Chris Welch sits down with us one-on-one 1 year after he took that gavel.
It costs more to do many things today that you did last year at this time.
What's on the Speaker's agenda in 2022? And which candidates are jumping into the statewide races for elected office, where you might see their names popping up before the June primary.
I'll fight to cut middle class taxes.
We go to the State Board of Elections for a preview of election security in this important midterm. And
it's the perception. We do not want any doubt in the public mind that our systems are secure, and our systems are secure.
We follow the big money driving the big lie, where conspiracy theories abound, and which political megadonor in Illinois is financing them. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, January 16. The official campaign season of 2022 is underway, kicking off this Thursday. Candidates starting to circle the state, passing petitions, trying to gather your signatures and appear on the ballot for that primary race in June 28. We saw a string of candidates lining up this week to run for statewide office. House Republican Tom Demmer announced his bid to try and challenge Treasurer Michael Frerichs in November. McHenry County Auditor Shannon Teresi launched her campaign for a chance to challenge Comptroller Susana Mendoza. Former federal prosecutor John Milhiser, a Republican, jumped into that primary race against House Republican Dan Brady. Whomever wins that contest would face the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State to replace Jesse White. Chicago Alderman Pat McDowell dropped out of that race to back Alexi Janulius. He's running against Chicago City Clerk Anna Valencia and Chicago Alderman David Moore. Oh, and the Libertarians also found someone to try and replace Jesse White. His name? Jesse White. That could be a bit confusing when you're punching your ballot. And at the top of the ticket, Republican insiders widely expect Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin to announce his bid to jump into that crowded primary race tomorrow on Martin Luther King Day. He'd be the only black candidate in that race for governor. Of course, Governor Pritzker started circulating his campaign petitions on Thursday this week to once again try and get on the ballot for re-election.
We raised the minimum wage from $8.25 to $15. People are earning more in this state because of Democrats. We've expanded health care in this state. Hundreds of thousands more people get health care because Democrats took office.
Joining us now is House Speaker Chris Welch, fresh off of celebrating his 1-year anniversary as becoming Speaker of the House in Illinois, the first black speaker in this state's 200-plus year history. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
This is an election year. A lot of voters are heading toward the ballot box this November and in June in this primary. And I wonder, what do you think are the issues that weigh most heavily on voters' minds as they select the next leaders of our state?
Well, I think the issues that weigh most heavily on voters' mind are the issues they're talking about at their kitchen table, the issues that we're hearing across dinner tables all across our districts. And that's, how do they keep a roof over their head? How do they pay next month's rent or next month's mortgage? How do they keep that small business open that they started? And those are the things that we're talking to our constituents about all across this state. And we're pointing to things that we did in the budget to help them keep a roof over their head, to help them keep their small businesses open. And those are the things that'll be top of mind as we prepare for the budget this year as well.
Where do you rank inflation among, you mentioned the kitchen table issues and just being able to pay your way through this life. Where do you rank inflation on that, and what are the pressures, what are the possible solutions that a state can do to address a larger national issue?
Well, inflation is certainly an issue. People are concerned about inflation because it costs more to buy beef for dinner. It costs more to put gas in your car. It costs more to do many things today that you did last year at this time. And so what we have to do as part of our budget is to continue to recognize that we're in the midst of a global health pandemic. That pandemic has led to supply chain issues, which have led to inflation. And so we have to continue to be able to address putting money in people's pockets to help them address these issues. And all of those will be top of mind as we prepare to do our budget.
Are you seeing those signs of alarm? Just last month in December, consumer prices spiked 7%. That was the fastest rate of inflation increase since 1982. Do you think Democrats see that in the electorate, and are they bracing for something? You mentioned in previous interviews just recently that this next year might not be the best year for Democrats at the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, of course we see inflation. We see it every time we go to the grocery store. We see it every time we go to the gas station. Democrats are well aware of the climate that we're in as we enter 2022 and the election season. And we have to go out and do the work. Winners do the work. We have to go out and talk to our constituents and point to them the things that we have done to help make their lives a bit easier. We have to show them what we're going to continue to do because we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We're going to continue to do some things. We have some resources provided through the federal government, the ARP funds. Thankfully, Democrats didn't spend all of that money in year one. We were planning for year two and year three. We planned ahead. We know that this pandemic wasn't going to go away overnight. And so we're prepared to continue to help address the issues that Illinoisans face all across the state.
And we look forward to covering those issues as the legislature returns here in a few weeks. This next week on the calendar has been cleared out again. It's already a condensed schedule. How much time do you really need? And when do you hope to see the General Assembly returning to work in person here, both chambers?
Well, I think with most things, we do better work when we're in person. I think we would all like to be back in person. We enjoyed being back in person and being around each other. But we're in the midst of a COVID surge, and we're going to watch the numbers very closely. Hopefully, we're at peak, and the numbers will start going down fairly soon, and we can return back to in-person sooner than later. However, the work of the General Assembly has not stopped. We are still working in the virtual space. We're doing our committee work. If we were in person right now, all we would be doing, Mark, is running up and down that hallway that you sit in right now, going from committee room to committee room. And so we're running from committee room to committee room virtually, where the work of the legislature is continuing, even though we're not there in person.
I hear you, and yet the House and the Senate just passed remote voting rules and remote committee rules again for this third year in a row. Let me go back to December of 2020. That was the peak of the deadliest wave of COVID-19 that we had. We didn't have vaccines at the time. And you were meeting at a committee here in person, that special investigative committee. Since then, schools have returned to work in person. We've seen a lot of other types of industries return to work in person. We've had the rollout of the vaccine. Lawmakers were among some of the very first groups of people entitled to access to that vaccine, plus the masking requirements, the distancing. We know how to do this. And I just wonder, with all of those things that have changed, how can we still justify meeting remotely today? Can't people space out in a committee room with a mask on?
Well, as you know, Mark, in the legislative space, it's more than just members. When we're in person, there's staff that we have to be considerate of. There's journalists like yourself that we have to be considerate of, and those who follow what we do in the legislature. And, we have to be considerate of everyone, and we want to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible. The virtual committee works very well. I think we had probably one of the busiest years last year than we had in quite some time. It showed that the committee work that was done virtually worked quite well. And so we do plan to return in person at some point. I like that to be when we believe it's safest to do so. If you saw a press conference by Governor Pritzker this week, hospitalizations are smashing records, according to Dr. Ezike. We cannot ignore that. And unfortunately, many of our colleagues, particularly those on the other side, like to flaunt our mask rule. They don't like to have the mask on. We have to constantly remind them to put the mask on. We don't know if they're vaccinated or not. And we know that these records of hospitalizations is because of those who are unvaccinated. And so we have to be mindful of our entire surroundings and try to operate as safely as we possibly can. And, I have when we were last there a couple of weeks ago, I had to take into mind that most of our staff was out, many of them because of COVID positive tests, and they have family members and members have family members. We have to think about the whole and not just ourselves.
I understand that, and then there are a bunch of members who are frustrated that they're following the rules, they're showing up in person, and they see others abusing the relaxed remote voting rules. I'm talking about elected officials specifically. You don't have to think too hard to imagine how, as a lawmaker was sitting there maybe voting on something remotely, there could be just off camera across the table from them a lobbyist who might have sponsored or brought them the very idea that they're voting on. There's just a lot of those areas that I worry about as we move forward. But we can move on. You mentioned the pandemic protocols and this uneasy time we're in. There are a lot of people in the public looking to schools especially and their places of work and business, and as they go out into life to see how this pandemic will change. Some of them are expressing concern about vaccine mandates. We've seen that political fight. Just this last week, a week ago Wednesday, about 80 people flooded the email inbox of a Sangamon County judge and tried to apply political pressure on one of her decisions about the vaccine and or testing mandate in schools. And I wonder how, you're a lawyer, you've practiced law, I wonder how you feel about this wanton acts of trying to pressure the judiciary. I mean, how do you see that? Is that appropriate? What's causing this?
Oh, I think that's totally and wholly inappropriate. The judicial branch is there to interpret our laws. They're not there to create laws or advocate. And so sending a judge emails to try to get them to advocate from the bench is totally inappropriate. And that behavior shouldn't be condoned whatsoever. What we should be asking our judges to do is to read the law, interpret the law, and follow the law. And if we need to change any laws, we need to bring that advocacy to the legislature. That's where you bring the advocacy work.
There were dozens of Illinois Democrats, including a few members of Congress, who recently advocated for expanding the size of the Supreme Court, that old term, packing the court. I didn't see your name on it. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, that's not an issue before us in Illinois because that's a federal issue. It's certainly something that our Congress should talk about and consider. I'm concerned about a lot of advocacy coming out of our Supreme Court. Right now they're doing a lot of advocacy on the Supreme Court rather than interpreting laws and following precedent. So I can understand certainly why that debate is happening in Washington, but I really don't have an opinion on that right now.
Of course, the House and Senate just, when they were here that one day this last week, they also passed the sub-circuit judicial maps, and this is something that you just have to do. It's on the calendar every 10 years, but Republicans, of course, were not thrilled with the way in which Democrats went about it, which was to take at-large districts, shrink them down, and really divide up which voters would elect which judges. Is that also influencing the shape of the judiciary?
Well, our job as the legislature is to do redistricting every 10 years, and we did that this year and last year, and a 3-judge federal court has said that our approach was the right way. Members on the other side are going to complain. That's what they do. They do it very well. But we got it right. We crossed our T's and dotted our I's, and we used that model at every phase, whether it was the legislative map, the congressional map, or judicial maps. We followed the guidance that our lawyers and the courts have provided us over the years.
And to be clear, that court ruling that you referenced was referencing the legislative maps. The sub-circuit judicial maps had not yet passed. But I want to ask you about this issue again, because President Obama has had some pretty pointed remarks, even just this last year, within the last few months. He called gerrymandering a pernicious effect that weakens the power of voting. He said it basically, I'm paraphrasing him here, but it dilutes universal suffrage, the idea that everybody can vote, by sort of stacking the deck with what odds will affect which outcomes here or there. Can you make the voters of Illinois any kind of pledge about what should happen in 2030? I know it's 10 years from now, but I mean, Illinois Democrats say we lead the country on issues of climate change. We lead the country on issues of criminal justice reform. On this issue of gerrymandering and partisan influence over who holds power, why not lead the country on that?
Well, first of all, Mark, let me say this. I think whatever should be done, whoever is in charge should follow the law. And as the three-judge panel said unanimously, we did follow the law. We followed every principle of the law and got it right. And in 2030, I certainly hope whoever's in charge will follow the law. I am not one who believes in unilateral disarmament until the law changes on the federal level and all states are playing by the same rules. I don't believe in unilateral disarmament, and we're not going to start now. And I don't support it.
With respect, Speaker, that argument only. With respect, that argument really only applies to Congress, right? Because that's where the makeup of the majority in House in Congress would be affected. But at the state legislature, you're not competing with North Carolina or Wisconsin. You're competing with Macomb and Quincy.
No, I'm competing with no one. I am following the law of the land, federal court precedents, Illinois court precedents, and I think whoever's in charge should do just that. And what I'm saying to you, a three-judge panel, 3 federal judges, 3 people who were appointed by Democrats and Republicans, even Trump appointees, said the legislature followed the law. And that's what our obligation is to follow the law. We did that, we got it right, and I would expect whoever's in charge to do the same.
And we are running out of time here, but Speaker, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that the Democrats broke the law in the House or Senate passing these maps. The question is really about what is the long-term thing to do that's in the best interest of our democracy. I'm going to frame the question this way. There are voters in Effingham, in Danville, in Taylorville, across central and southern Illinois that have felt for years, perhaps since the cutback amendment, that their voices are not being heard in the legislation passed in Springfield. You're the Speaker. You can bring Mike Marin or you can bring Brad Halbrook or any one of these members into your office if you so choose and make sure that those voices are being heard. That's the effect President Obama warned about, that with gerrymandering, more people's voices are being whittled away and they're losing that seat at the table.
Well, I can say this. We follow the data. And I said all along, Mark, and I think I mentioned this to you when we talked early last year, that diversity is the strength of this state. And we have a beautiful state that's diverse up and down it, north, south, east, and west. And the map that we put forward, the map that passed the legislature, that was signed into law by the governor, and that was found legal by a 3-judge federal panel, really emphasized the diversity of this state. It really showed up in our maps. And so if those folks weren't being partisan, they would tell you that every part of the state is accurately reflected in our diverse map.
All right, Speaker Chris Welch, thank you for joining us 1 year after. We look forward to year 2. Could we ask you for a one-word summary or preview of what we should expect? I've seen you talk about legislation that might impact crime. What are we on the agenda for in 2022?
Budget. Budget is our top priority. It's a very important document. It's a moral document. It tells you what's important to us, and we're going to be able to address a lot of things right there within our budget, including crime.
All right, Speaker Welch, thanks for joining us. We're back in just a moment.